We're back, cover one, the draft podcast. I'm Russell Brown. With me, as always, CP Christian Page, my man. Happy Friday to you. How are you doing, my friend?
I am good. Happy Friday and happy Halloween to everybody out there.
Yes, it's your time of the year, man. It is scary movie season. You got a thing going on the Twitter page @_Christian Page. Explain to me your process of the scary movie stuff.
Really, it's kind of random. Whatever is going on YouTube TV, and I'm just like, yep. Because I've seen pretty much I think all of the one that the pictures and the tweets I have on Twitter. I think I've already seen all of those anyway, so nothing's new. So if there's a new one, out there, then I'll add it to the list. But I don't know. It's pretty much just the surprise of the TV guide and what it has to offer. But yeah, it's horror movies. I'm a big movie guy, and horror movies is one of my favorites. And I know it does not match my personality whatsoever, but I don't know, just something with the kind of just the different types of movie atmosphere. I just like it. And you get to feel scared, but it's in a TV screen, not in real life. So I think that's kind of fun. But yeah, this is one of my favorite times of year. And so get to celebrate Halloween on a football Saturday. That's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting year for Halloween too. Just simply because, I've got a 10-year-old. He's not going to be doing any trick-or-treating. I don't think anybody's going to be doing any trick-or-treating. There was a COVID scare at his school. He was not in close contact or anything. He's fine. My wife got tested. She came back negative. So we're all good. Everybody's good. But it's just like, dude, you can't go trick-or-treating. I had a bunch of parties lined up. Like my son was going to go to his cousin's house for a birthday party for the Michigan State game. I was going to go to a buddy's house and then go back over to my sister's. And it's just like, now I can't even do that. I've got to basically like keep my distance for a couple days just to kind of limit the spread or potential spread. I don't want to put anybody in harm's way because of that outbreak. So it's just crazy. But yeah, it's cool. With Halloween on a Saturday, football and all that good stuff. And I'm just looking at your timeline of that Twitter thread that I was talking about, this running thread of just the pictures of every movie, dude, like The Conjuring, Orphan, you got Halloween, Friday the 13th. I mean, it's so many ones. So it seems like your favorite is Halloween from 1978.
Yes, it's my favorite, and I think it's the best one because I tell people this all the time. And, even when you watch maybe like the original Star Wars films, people are like, especially kids today are like, oh, that's so cheesy. And Halloween's the same way. It's like, oh, cheesy, that's been done before. But you have to think about it. Halloween was made in 1978. Star Wars was 1977. So it's like, they're not cheesy then because they initially made all these types of angles and music and cuts and everything. So I don't know, Halloween for me, it just kind of started the wave of really good horror movies. And even though I think John Carpenter got a little too excited and made some unnecessary Halloween movies along with, Friday the 13th and some of the Nightmare on Elm Streets, but still Halloween 1978 was pretty darn good. And it kind of set the scene for what to expect, I guess, from the horror movies from then on.
Yes, I mean in the 70s, man, what a time for movies. You had Jaws, originally made in the 70s, which, I mean, Jaws is just a great flick from that time. Definitely makes you view the ocean a little differently. Halloween, you've got like you said, Star Wars. So I mean, you're right, there's a lot of original things there, but I don't know why this is turning into a movie podcast, but we can stop now. We can go to football, which is what people signed up for. And look, Halloween tomorrow. Enjoy yourself, everybody. But with Halloween tomorrow, we got plenty of games on the agenda. And I'm going to start with the one that's just off the dome here, and that's Michigan State. This is going to be an annihilation. Michigan looked better against Minnesota than they've ever looked. Kwity Paye is turning all kinds of heads, which rightfully so. 23rd ranked player on my board going into this summer or coming out of the summer. And he's going to annihilate Michigan State himself. But Michigan's offense with Milton and just the way that they looked like a well-oiled machine in the first week of the season against Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Kwity Paye, 7 pressures, 2 sacks, and if you like Pro Football Focus's metrics, had an 88.4 pass rush grade, which ranked maybe the top or one of the tops in the Big Ten, if not all college football. And he just dominated. I think there was a set of situations where I think he had like 2 or 3 pressures in a row, and it wasn't just speed rushes. He was having a rip through move or an arm under move, and he may have even shown a little bit of a spin move as well. So he just overwhelmed a pretty solid Minnesota offensive line in that first week matchup. And Michigan State, I mean, for Kwity Paye, and no offense, Russ, I think it gets a little easier for him. And I know that's kind of hard to say, even though I know Fulele, the 6'9", 400-pound right tackle for Minnesota, was not playing in the matchup. So Paye did have his way with the backup there. But still, Michigan State, they've had some injuries on the offensive line and just some inexperience. So Paye may have his way again, and I think this whole Michigan D-line will have their way with that offensive line. I think Michigan will have their way totally against Michigan State. But Kwity Paye definitely a guy that stood out last week. Aidan Hutchinson, the other defensive end for Michigan, he's a very technical guy, really good against the run, shows a lot of technique as a pass rusher as well. So those are 2 guys that Paye for sure. You said he's number 23 on your board. I think he's I don't want to say he's a home run pick in the first round or concrete put him in there. But he's in game 1, he showed what he's capable of, and he's kind of set the scene. And for the defensive ends or just the pass rushers in this class as a whole, I think there's a little bit of fluidity, and maybe that is granted given to guys like Greg Russo, from Miami that opted out. He's one of the top tier guys, but guys like Kwity Paye that were on the radar coming into the season now have hopefully a whole season to show what they're capable of, and maybe some organizations would like to see that outside of maybe a guy that has some potential but didn't play in his final year of his college eligibility. So I don't know. Kwity Paye will be an interesting story to follow just because the evolution of his draft stock, but one, just the situation that he is in as a player, coming in as a borderline first-round guy and maybe making some headway and getting himself in the top 15 conversation.
I'm with you there. I mean, Kwity Paye he seems like already at this point, once we get through the craziness of whatever this season is going to be or become, it just seems like a sure thing in the first round, just by the way it's already looking after 1 game. And you're right, he is going to annihilate my football team on Saturday, which is unfortunate. And you mentioned Aidan Hutchinson. They've also got another guy at Michigan too, and that's Carlo Kemp, the defensive tackle number 2. He's pretty quick, a nice blend of power and speed. He's kind of that awkward listed weight and height and weight at 6'3", 286, what does he play? What's he going to be at the next level? Could he potentially be like a 3-4 defensive end? Possibly. Would he fit in a system like that? A multiple front scheme? Probably. But again, there's just that rare blend of power and speed that he has, and he had a sack on Saturday against Minnesota as well. So he's another guy to keep tabs on the interior. But switching over to another team with some talented defensive ends, just staying with the Big Ten. We talked about him quite a bit last week, and we're going to kind of pick up where we left off. Shaka Toney from Penn State against Indiana. I know we mentioned Indiana as a sleeper. They got the win. Very, very proud of that team. But Shaka Toney, 2 sacks last week, really looking fluid, really looking like another guy that could be putting his way into the first round. And he is 26th on my board. I only dropped my top 25. He's right there on the outside looking in. So I think he's got first round potential as well. I absolutely love him, and I wrote about him actually for us over at cover1.net. So I like Shaka Toney quite a bit.
Yeah, he's definitely one of your guys if you want to put him in that corner. And, talk about just a great duo of defensive ends over at Michigan with Hutchinson and Paye, and the same can be said at Penn State. Shaka Toney was the known guy coming in, but who was going to step in for Yetur Gross-Matos? From a production standpoint, Toney was definitely the safe bet, but from just a situational depth chart perspective, Jason Owe, the redshirt sophomore, 6'5", 255, he made his name come to fruition last week as well. He was constantly in the backfield. He has a basketball background, so he shows that athleticism on the football field, and he's just a hard guy to get your hands on. And he's not this technical pass rusher yet, but he's still showing strides there. And if you can get pressure on the quarterback, and at least get some kind of pressure to make guys make bad decisions. And I know it didn't necessarily work out in Penn State's favor last week, but still a guy that you're just seeing every single play He's a work in progress in that way, and I mean that in a positive direction. So those are two guys too that, I mean, the Big Ten has some very functional pass rushers, and sky's the limit for these Penn State guys along with those Michigan guys too.
Something with Penn State, and I don't think anybody's talked about it yet in draft circles, and rightfully so. He's only a redshirt freshman, but Penn State has the son of Joey Porter on their team, Joey Porter Jr., 6'2", 193. I was watching this game, number 9. He's a defensive back. He had a sack in this game. He had quite a few tackles. He was pretty physical, and just, I mean, the apple does not fall far from the tree here. And it's crazy that we are now in a time where we're seeing Joey Porter Jr. on the field, Asante Samuel Jr. I mean, we're seeing so many different players, Antoine Winfield Jr. I mean, so many different players are on the field as we watch their dad growing up, or, you know, we grow up and we watch their dads play, and now we're seeing their kids play. We're just getting old. But I found that very interesting watching the Penn State game this past Saturday. And, you know, I was like, wow, I didn't even know he was on the team. So keep that in your draft notes for another year or so. But Indiana looked pretty solid overall. What a defensive game, I guess you could call it, even though it was a high-scoring game because of the overtime and everything. But it was a pretty physical game. They went back and forth quite a bit. And Whop Philyor looked pretty legit. Stevie Scott looked okay. But Indiana was certainly a team that, you know, we talked about last week and going into this week. I mean, I thought that, you know, with how they've played so far, I mean, they got Rutgers coming up. I think they're going to beat Rutgers, and Rutgers is definitely a better football team than they've been years past, but they had so many opportunities with 7 turnovers to touch the football. Rightfully so. They should have won that game. I don't think Indiana's going to turn the ball over 7 times.
I wouldn't think so. Basically, they're not as good as a football team as we imagined, but yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the players we highlighted last week, they at least made their mark in some way, and a great first win over, I guess Penn State was a top 5, top 10 team. I don't know how the AP poll's working right now, but whatever the case would be a very foundational win for Indiana, a team that was 8-5 last year, and they had some momentum coming into the season. So it's kind of cool to see them, you know, make some noise in a Big Ten that I guess you could say is kind of open outside of Ohio State. I mean, we saw Minnesota, we thought they may put up more of a fight against Michigan. I know they had some glimpses of what they could be, and I know this, you know, they were out, or a couple players were out in that game. But yeah, I don't know. Indiana, maybe that sleeper in the Big Ten. I mean, I'm still wondering what kind of team Penn State can be, what kind of team Michigan can be. But outside of Ohio State as being kind of the slam dunk number 1, I think the league's pretty wide open. And of course, Wisconsin, you know, they have a mess to deal with right now. So I think the league is kind of open at this point. So it'll be definitely interesting to see if Indiana can kind of not necessarily fill that void, but maybe at least be part of that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Ohio State. How good did Justin Fields look? 20 for 21, 276 and 2 scores against Nebraska. He was throwing the money left and right. He was throwing every pass right on the money, and he looked does he even need to play another snap at this point? Like, just put the helmet down, go pro. Just pretty similar to Trevor Lawrence. I mean, these guys seem pretty flawless right now. And I get it, when they get to the NFL, the game will change a little bit. It'll get faster. Processing will need to become faster and those things. But Justin Fields playing Penn State, a 7:30 game on Saturday night. I'm super pumped to watch it, but I don't think I question Penn State going into this year, and I think Ohio State's going to – the line is 12.5 in favor of Ohio State. I think that's a pretty accurate line. I think Ohio State's going to beat up on them pretty good.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I could see a couple touchdown difference in Ohio State's favor. And with Justin Fields, and we talked about the defensive ends, the pass rushers from Penn State, I think this will be a good test as far as pocket presence go. And that's something we talked about last week on the podcast. Fields – by all means, he's a very polished quarterback, but he has every right to be QB2 right outside of Trevor Lawrence in the 2021 class. But I think the one thing that I really wanted to see him work on was pocket presence. And when that pressure comes, you know, how does he react? You saw him kind of have some moments last year of struggling against some pressure and then having to look downfield and make plays, not necessarily on the fly, but some of those improvisational skills. And I think that was just a lack of experience there. So, you know, a year under his belt, and now we'll just see how he reacts to some of those pass rushers that Penn State has, and 2 first-round potential pass rushers Penn State has. So that's really the big thing I'm circling in this game. But like I said, like you said, I feel pretty confident Ohio State comes here probably with a couple touchdown victory.
Yeah, for sure. But you mentioned Wisconsin. You mentioned the mess that they're in. They had their quarterback, Graham Hertz. He tested positive for coronavirus. Now the team is up to 16 or 17 cases of COVID. And this isn't, it's alarming, certainly. But I mean, Clemson dealt with this back in July or August. And granted, that was before the season and you didn't have to worry about making up games. Now, obviously, Clemson and Trevor Lawrence, he tests positive yesterday. He's not playing tomorrow against Boston College. It puts his game against Notre Dame next week in doubt because they've got to wait 10 days. Somehow, some way, it feels like Trevor Lawrence is going to be playing in that Notre Dame game somehow. But, it's crazy how Wisconsin and Nebraska is now canceled this week. And Illinois had a couple positive tests, so now they could be, and you'd have to think that stems from the Wisconsin stuff. So now you look at it and it's like, well, Purdue is on the schedule for Illinois. That means, Rondale Moore is not going to play for another week more than likely if that game doesn't kick off tomorrow. So you look at it from a prospect perspective here and at that point of view of players that we're not getting another week of tape on, because if they don't make these games up, I don't know how they're going to make it up because they've already started so late into the year. So it's going to be such an odd season where some teams only play 6 or 7 games. Some teams are playing 8 or 9 games. It's just going to be very weird. And I think you just kind of have to accept it. Like I was looking at the Michigan high school football playoff bracket, and they basically put every team in the state in the playoffs that wanted to be in. And like teams that are 0-6 right now in the state of Michigan are in the high school football playoffs. Now, granted, they're playing against the 6-0 team, and they're probably going to get destroyed. But it's just a fact of like you're going to have odd circumstances right now, and you just kind of got to accept it. And I say this simply because of Nebraska and their fan base and their team just rant and raving and just complaining about the fact that Wisconsin had a positive test. Like, you're going to have to overcome some adversity, Scott Frost. Like, you're not going to get handed a national championship. You're not going to get handed wins. If you wanted to win, you should have beat Ohio State and not lost 52-17 last week. Like, I don't know what else to say to Nebraska, but I'm just like, I'm tired of hearing them complain about COVID.
Man, yeah. I mean, it's for their safety. Like, it's not like Wisconsin's like, oh, Nebraska, you're too much of a threat. We're not going to play you with a handful of guys having tested positive for it. It's like, no, that's not the case. But yeah, just from the high level point of view, like you were talking about, it is interesting. And I know the Big Ten, kind of got scrutinized a little bit for kind of kicking off their season a little later because there's not really any leverage at all for, a situation like Wisconsin, Nebraska to make that game up later on and still potentially have, postseason aspirations. So that is one of the hiccups. That's part of it. I mean, that's part of 2020. That's part of the evaluation process, something you just kind of have to swallow and move on with and, put the asterisk on this season, whatever it may be. But, that maybe that is a gripe, but, there's a lot of uncertainty of how to handle this virus, how to handle this season so far. So I think this is maybe just one hiccup in that system. Hopefully we don't have to see it too many times again. I expect to see something like this happen again at some point in college football, but this is part of it, just having the zig and zag. That's 2020 in a nutshell. And that's what Wisconsin and the Big Ten are dealing with at this moment.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Obviously, we only get 1 week of Big Ten football, and now it's all possibly at risk. I'm hoping things don't get shut down, especially just from the perspective of the Big Ten. I mean, just how strict that they were at the end of August just to cancel the season and then come back and basically say, hey, we're going to have a season. And just the flip-flopping that the Big Ten has been doing makes me a little uncertain. But if we're uncertain about somebody, we got to talk about Trevor Lawrence. His positive test, we're assuming he comes back. I doubt he opts out now and goes pro or anything. But is there a chance that he opts out now that the positive test? I mean, he's got a couple days to think about some things. Does he start considering the future? I was asked that question on a radio show this past week about, does he go back to Clemson if the New York Jets have the first pick? Well, I mean, is that on the table? I think he's going to go pro, and I think with the coronavirus thing, it's even more reason to go pro, right?
Yeah, I think he leaves this year, and regardless if it is, the Jets, and I mean, this is a lifelong dream for these guys, and sure, he'll have another year of eligibility. Not that it matters; he would leave after next year, anyways. But who's to say if, the Jets may be in that same position again next year? So you can't guarantee. I mean, with how, crazy and unpredictable 2020's been, 2021 may bring something else, and Trevor Lawrence can't really control it. So I think he probably does enter the NFL draft after this season. But just taking the situation he's dealing with now, any other quarterback, maybe they consider like, hey, guys, I'm going to hang it up. I appreciate it. I'm just going to go prep for the NFL draft. But Trevor Lawrence, he's a different dude. He wants to go out there. He wants to play for Clemson. He was the spokesperson to get this season back in play. And I don't want to say he would kind of sound hypocritical if he would, cut ties with college football and head to the draft. But I think it means a lot for him to at least finish the right way at Clemson. So it would definitely surprise me, if he's not suited up in, I guess, 2 weeks from now after that Notre Dame matchup, if he's not out there on the football field, assuming all goes well and he's healthy and he's good to go. Maybe, if there's some health concerns that come with it, then, we'll come back and consider that. But it would definitely surprise me if we don't see Trevor Lawrence on that football field in a couple weeks from now.
Agreed. And I'm telling you, man, I think he's going to be playing against Notre Dame. I don't know how the hell they're going to pull it off, but I think Dabo's going to do something, and Trevor Lawrence will be playing in that game. It just seems like they're going to have something like, well, actually the positive test came in on a Tuesday and 10 days have now gone by and he can now play, or something, like just something they're going to finagle it some way. But teams that are back on the field due to coronavirus stoppage basically was the Florida Gators. That was the big team. We don't really need to talk about Florida State because they're not any good. And but Florida, they got some players. Kyle Trask has played well. He's got 14 touchdowns on the year. Our boy, tight end 1, Kyle Pitts, he's got 7 touchdowns on the year. They're back on the field Saturday night, 7:30 against Missouri. You're the SEC guy for us. I'm assuming we're going to see this game happen. God forbid something happens, but we got to think Florida is going to be looking hopefully like a team that didn't miss a beat. I'm assuming they're not going to miss a beat on this game because Missouri's not very good.
Yeah, Missouri's defense for sure is not very good, and their offense is very subject. We'll say that. But Florida, given circumstances, whether you want to call it adversity or whatever it may be, they're going to be chomping at the bit, no pun intended, to play in this game. And I don't see them really taking a step back. Their offense, with Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney, a couple good running backs. The offensive line looks pretty clean, and their defense is, kind of up in the air. But who isn't at this point, especially in the SEC, maybe outside of Georgia and the occasional happenings from Alabama. But Florida, I expect them to roll here pretty big. But who knows? Missouri's kind of always kind of that team that creeps up on somebody and gets the victory. But I think their luck ran out when they did it against LSU. I know LSU's not a great football team this year, but I think maybe that was Missouri's one upset win of the year. I expect Florida to take care of business here.
Yeah, no, without question. I would be a little surprised if they didn't. But yeah, we mentioned it earlier, Halloween weekend, and we got a lot of games on tap. We're not going to cover every single game, but there's got to be a game or two that we haven't talked about yet that you're going to be paying attention to simply because of some prospects, whether that is Alabama, Mississippi State, or maybe that's Georgia and Kentucky, whatever it might be. There's got to be a game here somewhere that we haven't discussed yet on the year, and some players that we haven't discussed yet on the year. What's a game or two that you're really looking forward to tomorrow night?
It's incredible that LSU and Auburn are matching up and neither team is ranked. I don't know.
It's crazy.
The first time in like 20 years. In 1999, I think, and that was the last time Auburn actually beat LSU in Baton Rouge. So forever ago. The game is in Auburn tomorrow at 3:30, 2:30 local time. But I think the kind of the matchup you want to circle here, one for this year and then another one for next year. But the one for this year, Roger Mccreary, the cornerback, one for Auburn against Terrace Marshall, the wide receiver of LSU. Marshall has been exceptional this year as that primary number one guy in LSU's offense. We expected it. 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds, can beat you deep, can beat you in the intermediate areas of the field. He's a pretty good route runner. Hands are pretty consistent as well. Mccreary's good in that press man situation. He's pretty good as the field shortens. He's gotten beaten up a couple times this year. He's had some pass interference flags that were maybe questionable, but, it counts. And so I think that'll definitely be a matchup, especially if you see Marshall lined up on the outside against Mccreary in a press man coverage. Auburn runs man probably 90% of the time in Kevin Steele's defense. But the other matchup I'm looking forward to, and this would be more for next year with the exception of Seth Williams, but Derek Stingley Jr. on the outside for LSU at cornerback, matching up with the physicality of Seth Williams. Seth Williams is used as sometimes a big slot. He's used on the outside. You're seeing more of the diverse route tree this year. He came up with a big clutch catch and a touchdown catch last week to beat Ole Miss in Oxford. So those are two matchups I'm looking forward in that LSU Auburn game. Of course, you can kind of look in the trenches, but to be honest, I barely can ever say this, so I'm going to run with it. The trench play in this game is pretty bad. And so enjoy the skill players, Seth Williams, Anthony Schwartz, Tank Bigsby, the true freshman out of Auburn. He is outstanding, guy that we'll probably be talking about in a couple of years from now. LSU still has some players on offense as well. So pay attention to the skill players in this one, a couple defensive backs. But, yeah, the trench play, maybe whoever wins that battle wins the game. But, it's weird to say that the Tiger Bowl here, it does not feature very good trench play.
It is so weird that they're not ranked. I didn't even realize that until you said it. That's crazy to me because I was looking at like the top 25 and I was like, wait, where's that game? Oh, they're not ranked. Oh my God. So yeah, that's crazy. But a game I'm interested in is tonight, actually, Minnesota, Maryland. I don't think it's going to be a great game, but the over-under's at 62.5. So give me some points because Minnesota doesn't have a defense whatsoever and Maryland doesn't either, but they do have a linebacker, Chance Campbell. He had 14 or 15 tackles last week. He's a junior, 6'3", 235. So I'm curious just to see what he does against Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman and that Minnesota Golden Gopher offense. But, I mean, I like Minnesota still quite a bit. They lost to it seems like a pretty good Michigan team. It pains me to say that, but I'm excited to watch it on a Friday night. So we get some Friday night Big Ten tonight. And then the other game is North Carolina and Virginia, which is one of the night games tomorrow on the ACC network. I'm pretty excited to watch this one just simply because of North Carolina. We've talked about them before, and they're really starting to get some buzz. Michael Carter, their running back, and Javonte Williams, their other running back. It's just a really good 1-2 punch. Carter has 584 rushing yards. Williams has 562 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. He's a junior, 5'10", 220. And, Carter is a senior at 5'8", 199. So, again, it's a very nice 1-2 punch, kind of that thunder lightning combo that every team looks for. And the Tar Heels are very fortunate to have it. And that's what's helping them be the 15th ranked team at 4-1 on the year. So Mac Brown has done a phenomenal job with this team. And obviously Sam Howell at quarterback has been somewhat of a difference maker for them. They finally actually have a quarterback. For years they didn't. But I just really like what I've seen from this team. Chaz Surratt at linebacker, he's got 4 sacks on the year. He's looked really good. And just overall, again, we talk about the running backs. This is a group or a duo that they're getting a lot of buzz right now. And I think it's a group that we've definitely talked about in the summer. And I'm excited to just watch them against a pretty bad Virginia team tomorrow. So I think that they'll eat it up. But that's tomorrow. That's really everything outside of the last two things, the quick hitters I want to get into. And staying on the running back train is Kylan Hill, the running back from Mississippi State. He opts out and seems like he's going pro. He's going to the NFL draft, and that's the expectation. He's preparing for the 2021 NFL draft. Your thoughts on Kylan Hill?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it was some point during the summer, maybe right when Mike Leach got hired, and he had some conversation with some of his offensive skill players, and Kylan Hill's like, hey, guys, like this offense is really going to accentuate my abilities. I'm going to show you what I'm made of. And then, handful of weeks into the season, he's like, no, I'm good. We suck. I'm kidding. That's not what he did, but he's done a lot of good for that state and that program, of course. But I know Kylan Hill, it's going to be an interesting evaluation. He was a stud in just your typical spread offense and really one of the better, more fluid backs in the SEC. And, you saw some of his ability in the receiving game. So maybe this offense did help him because we have a few seasons of him running more of that traditional offense. And then we saw him, making plays out of the backfield in the receiving game this year. So maybe from a scouting report perspective, he has the appropriate film. And maybe him continuing this year, I don't know if it would really do much for him, maybe from a draft evaluation standpoint or based on where he's projected. So as an overall player, I think he's pretty solid. There's some things he can clean up, but we'll get into that time, when we're nearing more toward the draft season and can kind of get a feel of where he's going to go. But I think there's a lot of potential in his attributes and everything like that to find a fit in the league for sure.
Agreed. I like him quite a bit. I mean, I don't think he's a bad prospect by any means. I don't think he's a top 50 player and or anything like that. And I don't want anybody to think that's harsh, but I think when you get into that, 70 to 100 range, somewhere in there, I think you could find a spot for him or even a little bit beyond it. It wouldn't surprise me if he went even a little bit later, just depending on what he runs and how he tests and things like that. But he reminds me of Kerryon Johnson just a little bit. I think play style is kind of similar, and I think he could have a similar role. And I think that's why I see some of Kerryon in him. And you look at Kerryon in the NFL, I never thought Kerryon was going to be a bell cow type of back. I never thought he was going to be able to carry the load. He just is not healthy enough. At least he wasn't, and he still really isn't. And I don't think Hill necessarily has those injury concerns, but I think from a pass catch standpoint, they could be used very similar in the passing game. Now, granted, AP and DeAndre Swift are eating up a lot of touches from Kerryon in Detroit, but at the same time, I think it's a very similar situation for Hill to transition into the NFL. I think he could be in a similar situation depending on what team takes him. But the other player, Mark Gilbert, on the defensive side of the ball for Duke, he has decided due to a personal decision, he's going to sit out the rest of the year, and that's obviously going to just, as he's a senior, he's going to go pro now, more than likely. He plays 2 games. He gets 8 tackles. He's got an interception. Definitely doesn't look like the same player from 2 years ago when we saw him in 2017. Obviously, the injury and all of that stuff. And, he had 6 interceptions. But he's not the same guy. And, I mean, I understand why he leaves. Duke is not very good. I think they're 1-4, 1-5. So it makes sense. He's probably not wanting to risk his health from the coronavirus stuff to obviously just on the field of any ACLs or ankle injuries or anything like that. You see all these injuries now. But what's your take on Mark Gilbert? And is this, kind of I don't want to say a bad year for him to go pro, because he was going to go pro anyways, but like it kind of feels like he needed to have a little bit more tape to kind of show, hey, I can be that same guy from 2 years ago.
Yeah, I agree, because there's a lot of cornerbacks so far this season that are making headway to be pushed in that top 5, even top 10. I mean, we talked about the Georgia guys like Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell, which those guys were, highly thought of to begin with. But guys like Jason Samuel Jr., I know we talked about Florida State doesn't have many bright spots, but he's definitely one of them, and he's had a pretty decent season so far. So there's a few other guys across the board as well. So I think Gilbert was kind of put in that range where he could make a lot of headway. But given, the injuries, given the situation of the 2020 season, I'm kind of with you. Maybe he didn't want to risk anything going forward, but, maybe he's outside the top 100 as far as my concern goes, at least to this point. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I'm not super I can't get a super in-depth depiction of Gilbert just of this year alone. So it'll be interesting to see, going forward of how the offseason tests, what kind of offseason tests can we have, we'll have access to. But Gilbert was definitely a name out there that had a lot to gain this season. So it is unfortunate that he is going to hang up his college career and start prepping for the NFL draft. Totally understand, not knocking him for it, but just from a projection standpoint, I think there's still a lot left on the field to prove for him to gain some headway in a rising cornerback class, I'll say.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super pumped. One last thing, that we are now finally getting some of the West Coast teams back on the field. Last night, it's not Pac-12 after dark, but it's like Bush League after dark, so it's all good. And I mean, it's the Mountain West, so it's still fun. But you had Colorado State and Fresno State last night at 10 o'clock. And then like tomorrow night, you've got Nevada and UNLV at 10:30. At 10:15, you got Western Kentucky and BYU. 9:30, you got San Diego State and Utah State. So like, I'm just super pumped about that. And I know here in another week or so, we're getting the Pac-12 back. So I'm super excited. I'm just more football. So we'll be talking about all that stuff more than likely next week or the week after, whatever however the schedule comes about. But yeah, no, I think that today was pretty good. I don't have anything else. Do you got anything else for me, my man?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the only other game that maybe is worth mentioning, you're talking about 5 teams. Memphis and Cincinnati is one of the early games on Saturday. And then Texas and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's kind of that sleeper in the playoff picture, whatever the playoff picture is for this year. And a lot of people hype up their defense, their offense with Chuba Hubbard and among some other players. And Tevin Jenkins at right tackle, I think's a guy that's going to get a lot of buzz, maybe in that top 50 range when the time comes for draft prep. But I don't know. That's an interesting game to circle. Does Texas get back on track? Does Oklahoma State be like, no, we are the guys to be in the Big 12? Right now, they're definitely making a case for that. So that'll be an interesting game. That game's at 4 o'clock Eastern time on Fox. So you can check that one out as well.
Tylen Wallace Hive, stand up. So appreciate it, CP. You guys, of course, can find us on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, at _Christian Page. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. We're on Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast, you can find us. Just search Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. But until next week, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.